Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tesla Science Center at Wardenclyffe's new episode of Tesla Unwired. This is Debbie Price. I'm Director of Marketing at TSCW. We're waiting for everyone to join us. While we're waiting to begin, I'd like to remind everyone to please keep your microphones on mute so that we don't have any background noise interrupting our broadcast. And also, we have the chat feature, which we use extensively in this. We hope you use it because it's your way to interact and ask questions during this live Q&A. So I encourage you to go down to the bottom of your screen and click on chat. That will pull up a chat box where you can enter questions. Today's Tesla Unwired, as usual, is going to be moderated by our host, Mark Alessi. And he will take your questions and bring it to Miles Chilson. So we just have a few more people logging in, a few more minutes, just a couple more minutes till our 2:30 start. Sit back and get comfortable. While you're waiting, you can also look at my screen, which has got some exciting information about some upcoming events on it. And Mark will also be filling you in on some details of that at the end of this broadcast.
Okay, Debbie, you're okay with me taking it away from here?
We are. We aren't at 2:30 yet, and I just want to make sure we've got people logging in and we're admitting them still slowly as they come in. Welcome. So while we're waiting, we just have 2 more minutes before we start. I want to give a shout out to some of our regulars who are coming to these on a regular basis. Steve Motza, Jay Moskowitz. Looking down our list, we got some new faces. The other thing we'd like you to do, Suzanne McDougall, welcome. I know you're coming to some of our events. Good to see you here. I want to remind you all to enter your questions in the chat and let us know where you're coming from, because people from all over the world are logging in for this broadcast. And it's very exciting to see people from Sweden, Germany, Japan, wherever, coming and joining us for this. All right, Mark, I shall now turn this over to you. Mark Alessi, our host for Tesla Unwired.
Thank you, Deb. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Tesla Unwired. Today, we're going to learn how to make everyday tech experience more efficient, meaningful, and interesting. My name is Mark Alessi. I'm the Executive Director of the Tesla Science Center at Wardenclyffe. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm heavily involved with the innovation ecosystem here in New York. And Tesla Science Center helps bring innovators and entrepreneurs together to talk about all things Tesla, all things tech. Here with me today is our featured Tesla Unwired guest, Miles Chilson. Miles is an award-winning entrepreneur, a keynote speaker, and an inventor working to transform the way we interact with and perceive technology. With patents for smart home and office technology, wearable devices, and IoT, his focus is on human-computer interaction and developing technology that seamlessly blends into the fabric of our everyday lives, while encouraging multi-generational usage. So without further ado, welcome, Miles.
Thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it.
So we met through your role with the Northeast chapter of the Tesla Motors Club. Before you go into your presentation on tech, can you tell me how you got involved with that? I believe you're the founding president.
Yeah. So yeah, I got involved with Tesla as the car company pretty early on. When they first started up, I was really curious about this. Being a tech person, being someone that's interested in cars too, so it was a perfect blend of these things, sustainability as well. So I had a fascination with it right from the get-go. And so I started doing some pretty heavy research at the time. This is far before I could afford one. But I eventually got to this place where I had known so much about them and I was a huge advocate for them, and eventually purchased one. And that was in 2014, 2015. And at the time, there were very few. There's really only one model. And so people, were very curious, very fascinated. I'd be stopped all the time. People were interested in it. So I started this small group, started with just 9 individuals in New England. It grew very quickly as people started to buy them. It was a forum for people asking questions and learning about experiences. And it was great to watch it grow so quickly. And so over those years into now, we now have almost 3,000 members, and we've taken over the entire chapter of the Northeast. So we have a bunch of different states. We're working with a bunch of different events, a bunch of different people, coordinating all these amazing Tesla events. And it's awesome to watch the growth over time.
There is a certain camaraderie amongst Tesla owners. When we have events on site, many travel to the site. We usually have 20, 30 cars on hand on any given event that we do. And you could just see how cohesive of a group it is. What do you attribute that to?
That's a really good point. There's this, group of people, not even just in the Tesla owners group, but enthusiasts as well, that join along in this and they want to be part of it in some way. They want to learn about these things. And I think what it really is that Tesla as a car company broke the barrier of, we got so used to seeing cars like a Prius, and I'm not, hurting on anyone's Prius, but electric vehicles from the start were never very attractive, and they didn't take into account the things that a lot of car people focus on. And so if you look at car communities, people that are interested in, vintage cars and classic cars, there's a design quality to it. And there's a continuity that flows between them. And so I think what Tesla really did was they took the time to develop a car that was unbelievably technology forward, but also very design forward when it comes to a car. And so you have now car people coming together with technology people, and who knew that synergy would be so spectacular? But it really is. It's machinery, it's electronics, it's sustainability, and it's future. And so I attribute that kind of clash together being a really positive thing that's just brought people in. And like a computer, like a cell phone, the car changes, it gets updates. And so people always want to know, what's going on. If I have my, Toyota or something out there, a lot of times, it's the same car it was yesterday. With the Tesla, I wake up in the morning sometimes, and now I find that I can watch Netflix when I'm in park, and that just doesn't happen with other cars. So there's a following for sure.
And pretty soon, thanks to the advances of Tesla Motors and the advances that folks like you are making in IoT, you're eventually gonna be able to just sit back, watch Netflix while your car drives you to wherever you're going.
Yes, it's going to be a crazy future. We'll see how that unwinds for sure.
So, Tesla Motors, there is definitely a connection between the man that we're celebrating and we saved Nikola Tesla's last lab. We're turning it into a museum and science center. And one of his largest inventions in a newer form is what powers the Tesla car. And, it was some of the original founders of Tesla Motors that recognized that and named the car company Tesla Motors. And between that, and I would have to say the group that helped save the lab, the Friends of Science, Jane Alcorn and the entire board, and their efforts and the press that was generated from that, the saving of the lab, culminated with the popularity and the rising popularity of Tesla Motors. People are finally paying attention to, again, who Nikola Tesla was and the impact he had on our lives. And so for those of you who are joining this program for the first time, the property is secured. We just got on the Federal Register last year, so nobody can ever tear it down. That was the milestone number one. And now we raised $10 million on a $20 million project. And we have enough money on hand to get started on the construction. We started some of the first construction on property and rehabilitating the chimney, and we filed for all the permits for the rest of the property. COVID-19 slowed things down a little bit, but we are going to be just revamping that over the next couple of weeks. We're hoping to open our first building to the public by early next year, and the lab building will be open as a museum and science center by the end of 2022. But we take this time now to offer virtual programming, that we're going to increase virtual programming. We're not going to slow it down once we open, but being able to have somebody like you, Miles, on hand. Most of the folks interested in this project are technology-driven folks. That's who got involved with the crowdfund. And so we looked at some of your work as a serial entrepreneur, and would like to have your presentation. And then if you don't mind, let us ask questions about the kind of work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mark. So I think speaking about, Tesla as an inventor is really, it should be an inspiration for many people, and a lot of people aren't aware of him. So, in my Tesla group alone, many people in there know about his work and his influence on the cars today. But many people that you'll meet out on the street that are curious about the cars aren't certain who he is. And so there's really this amazing legacy behind that and how it's developed into something now. And you're right, people are talking about him again, which is unbelievably important. I think it's always important to talk about the source of something. And that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is, in the world of technology that we live in right now, we're very surrounded by it in every aspect. We have our smartwatches, we have TVs, we have smartphones, we have, earbuds of every imaginable type. We have all these vessels in which we can interact with technology. And so a pretty interesting way to look at that is kind of what is the source of these things. And so my focus now, I run my own consulting firm. So I do private consulting, and I basically act as what I call the pirate inside, which is based on a book which was written long ago. But it's as someone who's entrepreneurial and thinks a little bit differently to get into these corporate cultures and kind of break those seams and to say, let's look at this approach differently, and how can we not necessarily reinvent the wheel, but make the wheel work better for people. And so part of the technology here, and Tesla being included, which I'll get to, my work surrounds taking human qualities and building them into the technology that we have today. So a big issue that we run into now is we see people pointing the finger at technology and saying it's ruining us, it's killing relationships, it's killing communication. And many of those things can be true, but in the end, it's that we basically control what that technology will and can do. And so we have the ability to utilize it differently and to make it more efficient for ourselves. And so my goal today is just to share that with people here. And my hope is that you all come out of this with a sense of going into the world and being more observant of good design and bad design, and how you can use technology to advance your life rather than trying to control it. So what I'll do here is I have a couple slides, and whenever I do these talks, I'm always very conversational. So Mark, if there are things that you wonder about, I love to have that kind of banter back and forth. So I'm looking forward to the questions as well. And I'll hop between these screens and me just chatting as well.
Great.
Awesome. Can everyone see this all right?
Yeah, it looks great.
Perfect. So the kind of focus that I'm going to bring up today is connected devices and human interaction, as I've kind of talked about. So it's the future of technology. So this is just some basic food for thought. And this information now is probably invalid based on COVID, just because so many of us have been spending time inside. We've been finding different activities to do. And I think out of many developments in this kind of crazy, very sobering time for many people, is that we're realizing that we can use technology to do a lot of different things. People are getting more creative with it. And that's really what I like to see. But this is just some food for thought, that we spend a significant amount of time in our day looking at a screen. And this little image below shows a lot about that relationship that we've built with these devices. And so, years ago, not even that many, we weren't as connected to a flip phone as we are to the screen now, because it has so many uses. I can check the weather. I can contact my parents. I can contact my friend across the world in Japan. I can do all of these things at the tap of a button, and they're pretty instant. The gratification is pretty instant from them too. So it's easy.
Miles, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second.
Yeah.
To say that Nikola Tesla in 1924, I could be wrong on the year, I usually get corrected on it, but he predicted when he was working on wireless that one day you'd carry a device in your coat pocket and talk to anybody anywhere in the world and send typewritten messages and movies. And people said he was nuts. And look what you're talking about on Tesla.
Exactly. It's amazing. And it's another point that we should start to bring up. This man has way more influence in the world than I think a lot of people think he does. But it's true. So this little image just shows how attached we can get to those things. And many of the times I refer to this in a way as our oracle, because we refer to it for everything. You know, we have a basic question, we refer to it. It's not like when I used to bike down to the library to look things up because my computer was either too slow and I didn't have a smartphone. And I was fortunate to grow up in a time where there were computers. Many people did not. And so it's really quite an interesting thing to see that we have this really close-knit relationship with the technology, especially smartphones. So one of the things I'm going to talk about, and a great way to describe kind of this world of technology, is Enchanted Objects. And so this book here, called Enchanted Objects by David Rose, who's a friend of mine, another serial entrepreneur and inventor, he coined this term. And it's an amazing way of us saying we have these objects in our daily life, and what we've done with technology is enhance them to work better for humans, for the people that are using them. So below are just a couple options, different pieces of technology that we've been involved in, and that have placed, totally different purposes in life, but give great example to how, I view technology and how I think we can start to utilize it for better. So the first thing that you're seeing on the far left is called the narrative clip. And this was a camera that came out, I believe, in 2014. And it could be worn on a lapel or a breast pocket. And it essentially took a photo every 20 seconds, I believe, of your day. And so at the end of your day, you could upload all of these photos and you would start to realize things that you would never notice otherwise. People's facial expressions, advertisements that you hadn't really realized were there. So it gave you a kind of just snapshot of what was happening around you that you may not have been overly aware of in the moment. So this isn't a necessary item for us to have. This doesn't drastically change the way we live, but it does enhance our knowledge of what goes on around us and essentially allows us to relive some of those moments and stitch them all together like that. So leading into that, you see this umbrella here with kind of the glowing handle. This is a great example of an enchanted object. This is a connected umbrella that basically hangs near your door at home, and it blinks if it's expected to rain in your area. Super simple. I mean, all of us have used umbrellas in our lifetime. I don't know anyone of any age that hasn't used one. So what we've done here is taken technology and built it into a device that we're already very comfortable with. And so when we talk about multi-generational usage, I mean that someone who is 10 years old to someone who's 90 years old has most likely used an umbrella, but we've just added a quality now to it that isn't something you have to learn. It's almost human nature. So we respond psychologically to light, color, and sound very well. So we've adapted those qualities into this product to just enhance our lifestyle. We don't have to look at our phone and go to the weather app every 20 minutes to know what's going on. As we're leaving our house, there's a very subtle reminder. Similarly with the pill bottle here, it's another example of a device, and I have one here, that would just blink at you and you had to take your meds. And so, the conversation we were having before this was when this first came out, adherence rates in taking medication were around 42%. And so with this little piece of technology that I, could have given to my 90-year-old grandmother at the time, would have been easy to use. All I would have had to say is this light's going to blink. And when it blinks blue, you're going to take your meds. And if it's just stagnant red, then you don't have to take your meds. You've already taken them. So this is easier for a lot of people, and this brought adherence rates up to about 92%. And that's crazy in the world of pharmaceuticals and adherence overall. But the nice thing about this is it has features built into it, like if you don't take your meds, it'll contact a family member and let them know. If your family member doesn't respond, it'll contact your doctor and let them know. If your doctor doesn't respond, emergency services can be called. So there's built-in qualities to this that you don't really, even as an individual consumer, have to worry about. They're built into it just to make your life a little bit easier, but not to disconnect you from something physical. We still have a physical, real thing that we can use and still build that relationship with something physical. We build those relationships with physical objects throughout our life. And this is another way of just keeping that relationship and sustaining it. So I've given you guys kind of an about me. But right now, working with my own kind of consulting and going into these companies, part of what I'm doing now is working for CVS Health. And, that's big in the pharmaceutical world. And I can't say exactly what I'm doing in there, but as we talk about this work, you'll get a sense that my main focus is really about creating technology that works for people, for the user itself. I've been doing this for a while now. I've worked on many of these projects. And if you go to mileschilson.com, you can see a list of those products and different just pieces of advice that I kind of give to them, different ways to view the world from a design technology perspective. So when I talk about technology, I talk about these 4 futures of it, and these connected devices and kind of seamless design devices are part of this. But what I bring it into is what I call the terminal world. And so this is really the screening of our lives. It's everything on our phones, it's on our iPads, it's these screens that try to convey that they can do everything all the time. They can do many things, but of many of those things, they're not as good as the physical object itself. You know, the weather app is a great thing, but if I can't find my umbrella, that's not helpful. So if my umbrella can tell me that the weather's not good and it's hanging right by my door, that's another easy way for me to interact with something rather than having to devote my time constantly referring to the so-called oracle of a cell phone. Then there's digital prosthetics. We all know things like Google Glass, wearable devices. So these are a big, kind of rising topic right now. But what we're starting to notice with them is they're a piece of technology that, similarly to a phone or a screen of that nature, takes away from our ability to interact with others. So when you're wearing Google Glass, when you're wearing these integrated devices that are wearable, we lose some of that sense of communication that we have with people. We have conversations, but are we having conversations with the eyepiece? Are we having it with the headpiece? Are we having it with the earpiece? What is that kind of transition that we're going through? And we don't want to lose that when it comes to our human connection. I think a really important piece for me to kind of go back on into my lifestyle is, I consider myself a Buddhist. I don't practice probably as much as I should, but this is a big influence for the technology that I'm interested in. It should be so subtle in our lifestyle that it doesn't feel like it's controlling us, but rather that we have control on technology. So that's a theme here, is that, technology is often pointed as something that's very bad, but it's really just how do we use it, and what's the best vessel to use it in.
To interject for a second, when you showed the screens earlier, and how helpful they are in our lives, I also think of that conflict of they're interfering with our lives as well, and they're kind of getting in the way of personal relationships when 2 people, 3 people in the same room are staring at the phones as opposed to talking to each other. And is that's part of the theme of what you're talking about, of controlling technology as opposed to it controlling us?
Absolutely. So that's a great point to bring up. And I talk to a lot of people, and many of my friends will do this too. This is becoming more of a common thing. And I suggest that everyone give it a try when we're back in social with people again, is that when we go out to dinner, bring a single cell phone. Someone brings one cell phone. I see people all the time doing the stacking cell phones on a table, and I've seen people play the game that whoever answers it first takes the bill. But I think there's this real practice in only having one, that you start to realize that you really don't need it. You're with these people, you've chosen to be with these people, and if there's an emergency, you have one, or if there's an issue that arises, that makes it easy. But I think you make an excellent point there. And especially in this time of COVID too, with what's going on, we're utilizing this more than ever in things like FaceTime, but the connection isn't as strong as it is obviously in person. I FaceTime frequently with my nephew. He's almost 3 now. And I think he's just kind of getting used to the fact that I'm a screen. I don't see him in person. And that has a sad quality to it as well. But it is an amazing thing. So again, it goes back to, we can use those screens for good. We can use them to be helpful, to be assistive, to be communicative in certain platforms. But when we're present and when we're with people, we should always remember that that's the human part of us. We're highly social animals. We should be utilizing that as such.
I feel like from a social standpoint, we're about to enter an age where we learn the appropriate use of technology and the appropriate manners of technology, whether it's not ignoring the person right in front of you, especially when it's a loved one, or, you take a look at social media, and 10 years ago, social media platforms like Facebook or others have brought us together, and now they seem to it's a very divisive modality where longtime friends that used to see each other in person are unfriending each other on platforms because they can't help but throw out sound bites and rhetoric at each other to the point where it frays the relationship. And I think we're about to, as a society, have to deal with how to appropriately use this, and what are the manners while using these devices and these technologies?
It's such an excellent point too, because even I find myself victim to it. There's so much going on in the digital world right now. And so I find, friends of mine that will post something that I don't personally align with, but I'm so tempted to comment something on it that I would never say to them in person. I would never act like that in person. I would never bring this up in person. So the fact that I, let that get ahead of the friendship and the human connection is different. It's, there's this very funny video that I once saw. It's just a very short video, but it was the, graphic of two dogs trying to fight one another, but they're both chained up. And then the second the chains are broken, the dogs just walk the opposite direction. We don't want that confrontation. That's not something most of us seek. So it's interesting that I think you're right. It acts sometimes as an enabler, and we're at a point now where we're going to start to see the effects of that for sure. And I hope out of a lot of this that things come up in a positive light, and that we can learn a lot about ourselves and what our capabilities are. But things like that, we have to be attentive of for sure. So on the last part here, I kind of talk about outsourcing. And so this is another major topic that we talk about, which is things like robotics. And so you'll see this little robot on the far left was called Jibo. And that's now out of commission. It doesn't exist anymore. People still kind of have the shell in their home of what this was, but it was just a little assistive robot, and it would, could take photos of your family, but it was far more communicative of a platform. It was almost like you were talking to a friend in your house. It would welcome you home. It turned and had its little eyeball thing that would look at you. It's pretty amazing stuff to have in your home. And the fact that we can think about this thing being a vessel for saying, hey, turn my lights on, make my coffee, all of these integrated devices now is pretty unbelievable. And similarly to Alexa, as we see here in the middle, and then Pepper as well, which was a robot by SoftBank's Robotics, which I got to take a look at in the early stages and actually physically use one. And it was basically designed to be a mall robot, to tell you where the bathroom is, to take a selfie with kids for fun, to tell you where the nearest stores were, things like that. So it was pretty amazing. And these pieces of technology are mind-blowing for many of us. We see them like, wow, I want to interact with that thing. And they're designed that way. They're designed to be cute. They're designed to be like children, as strange as that might be, because we build this sense of relationship with them. So when we talk about human qualities in technology, this is them almost noticing that and saying, if we want to get people to almost adhere to this platform, it needs to be something they can communicate with beyond just their cell phone. How can we make this thing have eyes and look cute and fun? And so the kind of fear of this, though, is, again, that we can lose sight of true human connection. The connection here isn't the same. If anyone in here has ever said please and thank you to their Alexa or Google Home or Siri, I commend you, because it just doesn't happen often. And that's something that we shouldn't lose in conversation. So when it comes back to those qualities of being human, another great device that I kind of think about, and many of these things are around my home and I utilize every day, it was a glowing ambient orb. And it was just a frosted glass orb. And it would change color on a variant scale. So it would be, from red to green. And you could set that to be basically anything. You could set it from weather. Similarly to the John Hancock Tower in Boston, it will change color depending on the weather. That's been something that's been known for a while. And there's a little jingle that people know that goes along with it. I don't know it, unfortunately. It means I'm not really from Boston, which I'm not. But it's a great just little indicator of what the weather might be. And it's just light on a clock tower. It's just an indicating light. So this orb could glow from something like pollen levels or weather. In my case, Tesla stock, for example. And you could just see in a color gradient how something changes, but I didn't have to devote special time to it. I didn't have to look at a screen. I walked through my kitchen and there it was. And I just knew, oh gosh, why is Tesla stock down? Then maybe I can start to engage if it's something I'm worried about. Right. But really the goal here, of these devices, connected devices and things that I'm working on, and I hope that other people start to do, is not that it's not a complicated thing to do. I have another great book here. These two books I keep with me all the time. This is The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman, who's another friend. And I just, connect on this platform that in here, he says, good design is really difficult to notice because it's so good that it just blends into the world. Bad design is really easy to see. we're talking about the pull and push doors. Everyone complains about that. That is very clearly bad design, but we're not really focusing on it. So as we as everyday people start to go out into the world, let's try to be more aware of good design and bad design and how those things might become enhanced with technology. And when I say technology too, I think another thing that's important to refer to is that not everything has to be digital. So technology, very similarly to a lot of things that Tesla did, for example, are very tactical things. It's the design of a doorknob, for example. It's designed around a human hand. That is in nature technology. And so we can think about those things in all aspects of life. And that's really where this focus is. So let's start to think about these products like, the smart connected water bottle that we worked on. That uses the same technology. It just blinks when you have to drink more water because, most of the world is dehydrated. And that's in places where we're fortunate to have access to clean water. We're dehydrated and it's a big factor in health.
So
this
Miles,
bottle
was you there for a commercial break? A word from sponsors, tap water.
Go for it.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay. So yeah, I think, this bottle just uses this simple light to tell you when you have to drink more water. And so we can start to use those things in objects that we've built relationships with. If you ask anyone in this group, I'm sure we all have very physical objects that we are sentimental with. And they can get better over time, and they don't have to completely change, and they don't have to be completely new, but they can start to adapt and advance technology without taking over our lives. We can control the amount that we use them. We can control how they affect us. And so a lot of it is just about understanding as humans that we have the amazing capability of interacting with one another. Like I said, we're very social. And so that's why these times are more difficult than any. And we kind of resort to technology, which is okay for now. But it's when we break out of this, let's remember that technology can be an enhancer of these conversations, but it's never going to replace them. And I think that's really, the ending point for me that I think about all the time is just, this is an assistive quality in my life, but it's not something that I ever rely on. If I lose my phone tomorrow, I'm going to wake up the same person I was today. And so I think that's just an important thing to understand.
You don't get that gut-wrenching feeling when you don't know where your phone is and you have to go to the store without it.
I'm human. So yes, I do get it, but I try to distance myself from that fear that there's too much weighing in on this. I just recently started printing out all the photos that I have on my phone. Right. I have a big box of photos now. And that's what matters the most to me. Those are super important memories, and everyone has their thing. Maybe it's voice memos, and maybe you want to put those voice memos on a CD or a tape if you really care to. We all have our methods of doing those things, but I think it's important to stick to what naturally we're good at doing. And that's that communicative platform, exercising our brain, exercising our memory. I try to remember my grocery list. I can't really, I'm not good at it, but it's something I try to do. And that's a simple mind exercise to just exercise these very human things that we don't want to lose over time.
So, I see a lot of devices and assistive devices. Have you focused a little bit on what Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink, where these devices are now going to be implanted in us, making us these superhumans that we don't even have to talk anymore. We're going to telepathically communicate.
Yeah, it's an excellent point to bring up. And it incites some fear in me. I think it brings me just a level of, there's already some anxiety when it comes to someone, walking down the street, for example, talking into Bluetooth. Yeah. And I go, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I thought they were talking to me. And we have those moments every once in a while.
In the men's, some guy talking in the next urinal, like, why is this guy talking?
Yeah, in very strange situations, this has happened, and I've been victim to one of the people causing it too. So it really is interesting with Neuralink, these implants, and we go back to this idea of these kind of digital prosthetics. I talk to people in the design world and in the technology world who go to the farthest they can in one direction with this, saying that if they could replace all their limbs right now with technological, metal versions of it that could improve the way they run or the way that they, lift weights or whatever it may be, they would do it. And that's interesting to me because we're born, and maybe it's just the natural side of me just bringing this out, but we're born with these amazing tools, and we're fortunate of us that have these amazing tools. And even those who are born without some of these, we adapt to them really in amazing ways. And so when I think about things like Neuralink, I do get a little bit nervous about how that might work. And I can say that personally, I may try it, but I'm doubtful that I'll ever adhere to that system. I like the connections that I have, and I want to be able to use my voice. I was given this voice, and I was given the ability to speak. And that's a very fortunate thing that some people don't have the ability to do. So I'm going to sustain my humanness for as long as I possibly can.
You're highlighting what the struggle is, and that is we're struggling with how technology is affecting us and remaining human. And when we talk about, like what we were mentioning with social media and how it's sometimes bringing out the worst of us, it's the way our brain is wired. I don't know if you ever read the book Sapiens, but a very hot book, and I'm halfway through it. I was reading it to my young boys, and it scares them, so I got to read it alone now. But between that, or there's a book, The Righteous Mind, and they can really go into how we've evolved from a tribal society and how our brain is wired, and 90% of our brain is still the animal brain. It's not the prefrontal lobe cortex and the reasoning part of the brain. And so those are the parts that are lighting up when we're getting into arguments on social media, and you're not using your reason when you're arguing and throwing out a very unthoughtful 200 character text. So we're gonna have to struggle through that. But you move to something like Neuralink, and you're talking about the inability to communicate because you have these little sound bites and this little attention span. Well, it's better when you're one-on-one and human. But when I watched Musk on Joe Rogan, he's talking about how when you and I are communicating right now, there are so many processes happening in our brain, and we have to funnel that through the language that we know to try to be as succinct as possible, but it's inefficient, that we're losing some of what we're trying to portray to each other. And Neuralink is going to be an enormous amount of shared data. And not only is it communicating with you, it's going to be being able to grab information and data from the net, and it's going to be layered with AI. It scares, I think, anybody that talks about it, including me, but it gets me excited as well. And that's probably what gets many people that are excited about technology. What can we do, but how do we do it responsibly?
Exactly. That's a great point. It is super exciting to see that come to light. It's a double-edged sword for me. But you're right, talking about the amazing capabilities that it could have to almost in a way enhance the type of conversations that we have. So it really is interesting. I'm going to be following it closely, and I'm sure you and I will continue that conversation as it becomes something. It's definitely exciting to watch. And I think, it circles back into the world that Tesla takes a part in this too. And so, my interest with Tesla goes back to these same objects that we're talking about now, because very much so that is the car, right? That's the thing that brings me from point A to point B, but they've enhanced it with this quality of technology, let alone, keeping out the sustainability or the fact that it's electric. It is a computer in its own. So it knows when I go to work, and it knows to heat the car. I like it 70 degrees. So it heats it to 70 degrees before I even stepped into it, just because it knows when I start to go to work. So it's little things like that that build in. And that's what's so amazing about watching this car and watching it grow. Right? Like we talk about it almost like it's human in a way, but watching it develop over time for things that are designed to be more efficient for us without making us totally useless, right? Like the self-driving feature is going to be amazing. And that is a little bit, frightening, just because we won't necessarily have to have control of the vehicle. But right now we do. And,
Right.
and it's a pretty amazing tool for that. A lot of people enjoy driving, and I don't see self-driving cars being overly predominant for people who love to drive. And I'm one of them. So it is interesting. We use it the way we want to use it. It's pretty amazing.
It may take a while for people to give it up, whether it's our generation or it's our kids or it's their kids. And a lot of the questions always arise, are we going to see these changes, and I'm an optimist. I believe that a lot of the changes that we're talking about, we're going to see in our lifetime. Don't know if I'm flying to Mars. I probably will stay right here.
I'm here with you.
Don't mess up right here so much that we all have to find a way off. But, you know, it's really exciting to think about, you know, how far we can propel human potential. And, you know, as an entrepreneur, I'm sure you're always trying to push the limits of human potential, even on yourself, something that Tesla tried to do in his day. Tell me a little bit about your routines. Like, how do you stay on top of being the best Miles there is so that you can create?
I love it. That's great. That's a really good question. I think part of what I really do is, especially now, so all of this staying home has been really difficult for me because I'm an analyzer. So I'll go out with friends, you know, before all of this, and I would go out there and I would be one of the people that would completely trail off. They would go somewhere, they'd have an agenda, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I just saw this trash can that automatically calls the trash car when it's filled. And I just will veer off in those directions, and I start to think about those things a lot. And so it's funny now, kind of staying at home, and things are easing up a little bit, but I have elderly family members, so I prefer to stay in and only do the things that I have to. That's my preference. And I've analyzed everything in my house. So, you know, part of my routine is really, I love thinking about things. I love drawing things up. I wake up super early in the morning. I hop on my computer. I sometimes just look at what's the most recent kind of updates in the world of tech. And I start to think about issues that arise, right? Like the pill bottle and the water bottle were issues that people saw and needed to be addressed. So there's a hydration issue. There's an adherence issue. We can see those things from news articles. We can see them by simply leaving our home. And so now it's a little bit strange that many of us aren't. But I've continued to analyze the things in my home that I thought I had analyzed so far. I knew everything about them. And now I'm starting to see that all these things that I thought I had developed as far as I could be developed even further, to just be better for me. And it comes down to things that, again, aren't necessarily a digital thing. It's like, how comfortable is the couch up here in my little office space? Like, how are the door handles shaped? I think about all those aspects. So I'm always up here ruminating and thinking about those ideas. And my routine really is, I'm kind of one of those people that goes where the wind takes them. And I'm not afraid to step into situations where, you know, something isn't right and I might have a solution. Like, I'd rather try it than never know. I think that's the kind of key to what I do.
I think when I try to explain entrepreneurship to people, and you know what I'm talking about when you're at a party and there's 100 people there and 95 think you're nuts if you open your mouth and you start talking about, you know, what could be and starting businesses. But for the small percentage of populations that like to invent or entrepreneurs, we can go off on a riff for a pretty long time. I should probably stop riffing. I know we're getting to the point of the program where we'd like to open it up to questions from folks that are in the audience. We were asking you to put some questions in the chat room. Doug, if you want to come online, if you were able to log some of those questions, if there's any that you want to ask, or, you know, you met Doug Borge, our COO, earlier before we started the program. Obviously, you realize how talented he is and into technology. So he might have some of his questions of his own. But Doug, do you have any questions that we have to ask?
Absolutely. So many questions, really, Miles. I think, first of all, this was incredibly interesting. And one of the underlining kind of topics that I kept hearing here is humanity, right? And I'm interested in to kind of hear your perspective of what intuitive really means, and intuitive in relationship with humanity, right? For us, like you were talking about how Tesla, the car company, has made this sleek look that really makes it so easy. And for me, and I don't know if this is how you feel, I feel like the intuitive part that we talk about, that we crave, the simplicity, is really the human connection that we're looking for in technology. And that turnoff that we get, that when we have an overcomplicated system, really forces us to shut down, right? That idea of that simplicity, or the beauty of less, and those clean lines and colors, and how you're leveraging those natural kind of responses that we have as humans, right? And say, wow, if we're responding to colors, how do we leverage colors in a positive way? If we're responding to noises, how do we leverage that in a positive way? And inside of that design in particular that you had with that top, how you need to take it and red when you don't need to take it, I think it's ingenious, and curious as to what is your thoughts in general about intuitive and the direction of technology, and what would be the, how we would combat this information overload to make it into something positive.
Yeah, Doug, that's an awesome question. So I think, one of the ways that there's two ways that I really look at this. And so when I bring up the idea of just intuitive nature or something being intuitive, I actually did an interesting project focus on this that's on my website, which talked about trying to understand what people take from STEM technology. So at the time I was working for a STEM tech company. And part of the focus was, how do we understand what people are absorbing from using STEM tech? They might be programming this robot, they might be using something. How do we know what they're learning? And so there were old ways of kind of finding out what was truly intuitive. And so they would hook you up, you'd have all these anodes, and they would give you something and they'd watch spikes in basically brain activity. And so it was an interesting thing because you would find major inconsistencies because of white coat syndrome. They had these things basically tested in labs on, children, for example, right? They'd have these children hooked up and give them a toy, and the kids are like, what is going on here? So that's not true intuition in a way. That almost feels forced. And so part of what we worked on was a tracking system to understand things that are psychologically indicators of what we truly feel. So, there's plenty of people that do work into understanding, if someone's lying, they may do something a specific amount, or, when we're interested in something, we tend to be pretty steady. We don't tend to twiddle our fingers very much. We don't tend to roll our eyes or bat our eyes around the room. So when I think about something being intuitive, I really look back into the psychology of us as humans. So when I look at colors, part of the color design behind this is we see how people truly react to a color. There's human nature built in over time, and those things will continue to change as we develop. But right now there's information based on how we react to green. It's calming, it's nurturing, it's informative. Red is alarming. It kind of gives us that fight or flight feeling, like, oh, we have to do something right now. I need to act. So when it comes to being intuitive like that, I think we really should start to look at psychology as another method of design, bringing these things in and seeing what do we naturally tell without even knowing that we're saying it. And so I think if we can start to bring those things into the technology that's being developed today, that will give us a huge booster into the future of just understanding what truly works for us as humans. And that might be, a trail off of your question, but I think it gets to the point of that intuitive nature is built in. We do have to crack it. And there's so many ways to do that. And I think, all of us can have a part in just understanding what's most intuitive for us. And maybe that's a trend. And maybe we start to elaborate on that trend as well.
We have one question from the audience. Would you consider the iPhone intuitive?
That's a great point, because Apple is a company that really focuses on aspects of interaction design, and so they do look at a lot of this psychology. There's a reason things are colorful and bubbly, and easy to swipe, or intuitive in nature by things like pressing and holding. So the iPhone, in a basic form, is definitely it's an intuitive, well-designed platform, but I do think, at the same time, it asks for a lot. I think it is more intuitive for many people than an Android device or something of that nature. But these things like notifications, the way that we get notifications being sound, light, color, these aspects, that's the intuitive part of this. I think where the iPhone isn't intuitive, that it tries to do so many things. So it almost fogs its own view of those things. We can, there's a measuring tape on an iPhone now. It's not good at measuring, but it's something we can utilize in there. So it's an excellent question. And I don't know, a 100% answer, but I do think there are more intuitive qualities to an iPhone than many other devices. But it just does come back to how much are we looking at that device. Hopefully that answers the question in some way.
Miles, I had a question in regards to your, at the beginning of your presentation, you had an umbrella. What that the umbrella actually did that made it, I don't know, smart umbrella?
Yeah. So basically the umbrella was really simple. It just had a chip in it basically that's connected to the weather channel by your zip code. So wherever its current location is, it just says if there's stormy weather expected, and I think there's a algorithm between chance and like percentage, it will just make the end of that umbrella glow enough for you to notice it. Because that's a very common thing. I leave my house without an umbrella all the time, and here I am running in the rain looking like a fool. This might have been something that I may have realized just upon leaving my house that I wouldn't have thought about otherwise, because our world is so, muddled by other things constantly happening that I may not have thought about it at all. So it's a very, very simple indicator. And at the same time, it doesn't need to be anything more than an umbrella if you don't wish it to be, but it does have capabilities to do so if it wanted to be.
The amount of times I've been stuck in the city without an umbrella that would have been useful like that would have been great. But man, I have been stuck more times than I'd like to say in the city with an umbrella and it being dark.
Yes, right, exactly.
It just seems to line up.
It always seems to be New York City where I get stuck as well without an umbrella.
That's how it is. And it's funny too, there's a song, I think it's just called Umbrella. And I think it's by maybe NRBQ, but it just talks about how the umbrella is it's always there when you don't need it. Like, it's too windy out or something, but it's not raining. And of course it goes the opposite direction and breaks, or it comes back and pokes you in the eye. Like, it's just, it is perfectly lined up like Murphy's Law, that we just have an umbrella when we don't need it and don't have it when we need it. So I'm right there with you.
Now, not to beat the umbrella up too much, but does it have to be charged? I'm curious how that works. Obviously, you need some kind of electrical current to run that chip. How does that work?
Yep. Yeah, so there is a battery in it. The charge time, so I believe, I think the one that I still have, I have not charged ever. And I think I've had it since maybe 2016. Wow. And it's just because it's and you can charge it. There's no issue with charging it. There's a port. But it's really just it's so simple. It's not doing any noises necessarily. It's just an ambient light that maybe blinks for, a couple seconds as you're near it. And that's pretty much it. So battery life is long on those things. And that's a great point to bring up, Mark, because so many of these devices depend on that. This bottle is only useful to me if it works, right? It's only useful in that method if it works. So things like battery life are always super important when bringing this stuff up.
I've seen technology like that where, there are sensors that say you would put into the ground, and even though it's got to connect to the internet, it's using like a low frequency, like almost like a medical grade RFI technology. So it's such a small amount of data that it doesn't take a whole lot of electric. And so you can charge it and it could probably last 5-10 years before that sensor has to be replaced.
Exactly. And it's so funny you mentioned that. I have one right here. This is a beacon that is usually actually made the wooden disc that it was around. But it's simply an NFC tag. And this actually just sits by my bed in the morning. And I sometimes, like all of us, want to sleep in a little bit. But if I tap my phone to it, it'll actually start to read out the amount of time
42 minutes
that it takes for me to get from my house to my office on a day, the traffic or whatever it may be. So I wake up, I can tap my phone if I want to, or I can look at it if I choose to. And it helps me choose how much time, I have to sleep in. So it's a great point. You're bringing it up. It's very real and it takes no energy at all. So it's perfect.
So Miles, from our previous conversation before we started the podcast, we were talking about efficiency, right? And I'm curious as to what are your lifestyle apps or lifestyle things that you use to make your life more efficient?
Yeah, that is a really good point. I think when I utilize my phone, it's funny. People will often ask me why I have so many apps. So like I said before, I experiment and I analyze a lot of things. But the apps that I truly find myself using a lot are intuitive apps for informational purposes. And so what I mean by that are things like Robinhood, for example, for stocks. I don't necessarily use it to invest, but I use it as a really simplified version of looking at the market. So for me, if I look at the stocks app in Apple's native app, it can be kind of difficult to read. It's not easy to view at a glance. And so that's just something that really quickly kind of works to give me a sense of I've gotten a snapshot of what I needed instantly, right away. And so I also use, very strangely in my phone, is shortcuts. So that's a native Apple app. You can create your own NFC tags in it. You can set reminders. It essentially allows you to create your own automations using the phone that are designed around your personal needs. So that's another one that I use a lot. There are so many apps on my phone. I wish I could go through them all, and so many great and helpful versions. If we go to the electric car side of things like PlugShare. They're intuitive, very simple apps that have qualities like widgets built in. Thinking about all aspects of the app and what information it gives me through that. So I'm one to very quickly go to apps that are very simple, maybe like 1 or 2 pages. And I would actually, I think you just maybe brought something up that I'll do is on my website, just start to list some of these apps that are great examples of these things. I've never done it before, but I think it would be good to share and to get people's views on it as well.
Yeah, something we definitely want to share with our audience about just what is Miles looking at? What is Miles talking about? Miles, in terms of like corporate culture, I think a lot of people inside of the corporate culture really think inside of that box, and it can be difficult to break that box. And there are certain companies that we think about that break the form of what would be your typical Fortune 500 corporate culture, right? And what are the kind of thoughts that you have in your head? What is it that you go into that corporate culture and give that shell shock that really gets people to think outside of what that normal parameters are that we really get stuck into?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think part of what my focus has been with that, and so I would suggest anyone that has that kind of curiosity is to read The Pirate Inside. Forget who the author is, but it's just a great book that highlights kind of infiltrating the system in a way. And how do you, from the inside out, start to develop something that spreads and can bring the company more efficiency, more success, things that actually have goals that people want to use. So a lot of companies will create an app and people don't want to use it. It's just, it wasn't designed with people in mind, and it may have a great idea behind it. But I do think, going into the corporate culture, part of what I have always focused on is legacy systems. So within many of these companies, there's a legacy system that sits in place, and it's usually like a triage or something, and it's a lineup that you have to go through. And there's so much red tape, and it can be really difficult to break out of that. But frequently what I've said is we have to start from basically nothing, right? So there's another great book, I could throw out books all day, but 0 to 1. So it talks about this idea of having nothing, imagining that with a project that you have nothing. So I'm working on a project now, can't speak much about it, but it's basically saying we have to start from 0 and view this to understand who are we speaking to? Who are the people that we're trying to reach here? And we're going to develop from the start point as if we all came into this as people that have never met each other. So that's my method for going forward with it. So we start with iterative research and understanding who we're really going after. And then maybe we start to iterate on a prototype design of something like that, whether it be an app or a hardware product. And then we experiment with people to get that. And maybe we do this several times through and more effectively get through the triage system, or the triage system becomes obsolete. And now our system has worked so effectively at getting information and understanding what we're doing that we can use that to lead and learn forward. So there are so many different methods. I think The Pirate Inside highlights, a lot of how you have to be willing to fight. You have to be willing to, in a corporate culture, it can be obviously hard to, to leaders that are higher up to say, well, I don't think that's right at all. But sometimes you have to do that, and it's a quality that can be learned over time. I don't think someone can be born with that quality, but I do think it's important to speak on true issues and be as transparent as possible. So communication and transparency are huge in just saying, when I don't think a design looks right, I'm the first to say it. And if everyone in the meeting doesn't like what I've said, that's fine. But I made my point known. And if we get to a point where maybe what I had done would have worked better, I'm not going to say I told you so, but I'm going to say, hey, I've been thinking about this thing. Let's try it. And let's just take different approaches. And I'm one of those people who believes we keep going forward until something knocks us back. Maybe we have to choose a different direction at that point.
So Miles, thank you. Before we close the program, any advice for us? You advise it to us now, and I appreciate that. Look forward to working with you on events in the Boston area to raise awareness for this center amongst not only the club members, but innovators in the MIT area. But what do you think this center can do, one, to not only celebrate Tesla, but to celebrate innovation and truly make an impact?
Great. So I think part of what you guys can really do, and what I will send people off with, is the Science Center here, and going in and seeing a place, being in a physical place where so much innovation and invention and thought happened. We're not in that time period. We don't know what conversations happened there, but be open to those ideas of understanding that all of these things went through a process, and the process starts with an idea. And so it's not difficult to be a designer. It's not difficult to be technologically savvy in certain areas. It's about how much thought we start to put into those things. And, many times I'll get the call from my mother saying that she doesn't know how to do something on her phone. And that's one of those things where that shows its design flaw. That shows an area where something isn't working right. She should be able to pick that up pretty quickly. And so I think what you guys have the potential to do is share the end result of many of these pieces of technology that Tesla came up with. And people on their own can start to understand that this started from something and developed into this. This wasn't a one-shot thing. As much as we want to believe people like Tesla, these amazing innovators that inspired the future that we live in now, did it in one thought and it was perfect right away, it was never like that. It's never clean. And it's okay not to be clean. Like, it's okay to scrap a project, but remember that you can come back to it. So I say, just for people to observe as much as possible and start to think about these little things, and then speak up if they're not working for you. Don't be afraid to send an email out to Apple because something isn't working right. Maybe you'll get a reply, maybe you won't. But you've identified something that could change the usage for a lot of people beyond just yourself.
That's great.
Awesome.
So thank you for joining us. This was one of my favorite shows. Hopefully we can have you back sometime. To our guests in the audience and Miles, I know we're talking about doing something with the new Tesla movie that's coming out, but I want to invite everybody to be part of our global event on site, the Tesla movie by IFC Films, which is coming out in August. We're going to get a pre-screen, a special VIP screening on July 11th to celebrate Tesla's 164th birthday and give the gift of learning. It's a fundraiser for our virtual education programs. So there's going to be a drive-in movie night at Wardenclyffe, plus an online screening for our guests that can't make it to the site. There'll be a pre-movie show by Greg Lay. For those of you who remember, Greg built some of the biggest Tesla coils in the world. He brought that coil to the site for last year's party. He'll be firing it off from his lab in Alameda, California. And we're going to have a performance by Architect, the rock group that uses large Tesla coils as part of their performance. The electric comes right out of the coils into their guitars. It's pretty amazing. And we will have a Q&A session from a number of the actors involved with the movie, including Ethan Hawke. So please visit our website for more details, teslasigner.org. And until next time, thank you. Keep innovating.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you.
And then I think for anyone else who's still in here too, if you do have lingering questions, feel free to go to my website, which is just mileschilson.com, and you can send me those questions. I'll get to them as soon as I can.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.